Hello, good morning. Welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna episode 195, where we are looking at the awesome subject of voices of children in our collections. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres in the Highlands of Scotland, in Inverness, Fort William, Portree and Wick, where we look after historic records from this part of the world. And as some of you will have seen if you follow our Facebook pages regularly, we have just recently been officially awarded Record Keeping Service of the Year 2024 for the whole of the UK and Ireland, which was really, really exciting. So if you haven't already had a look, please do scroll back on our Facebook page, have a look at some of those pictures, the video, and thank you so much to all of you who voted, because it was a public vote, which we won by 63%. We got 63% of the public vote, and we're just so grateful to all of you who voted. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. And if you're in the UK and you're able to gift aid as well, then please do that. Okay, so this week we are looking at a fascinating subject, and I've really, really enjoyed pulling this one together, doing the research, writing things, reading far more than I can possibly share with you. And that is always the case. I always end up reading vast, vast amounts of archive material and then distilling it down into a half-hour talk. But I really enjoyed writing this one about the voices of children in our collections. There have been many times where I have roared with laughter on my own in the strong room this week. Now, it's often been said that much of history is written by or told by middle and upper class white men, and that's not entirely true, but there is an element of truth to that. But that is changing as we examine our collections differently, as we ask different questions of our collections as well, to pull out the voices that are there. So how do we find the voices of children who generally aren't record keepers? They're generally not the people making decisions in businesses, in churches, things like that. So where do we find children's voices, their thoughts, their feelings, or even just their handwriting? And when we find them, what can they tell us, and what can we learn from them? So in this episode, I'm going to look at some of the places that we can find children's voices: in schoolwork, in school magazines, in letters and diaries. So I'm going to start by looking at children's voices within the structure of education, before looking at them writing to adults, so therefore they're still considering an adult audience when they're writing to adults, and then coming on to the absolute joy of children's diaries at the end. I will talk about Malcolm, for those of you who are fans of Malcolm Blaine's diaries, but also another favourite child in the collections, William J. Scott. So I was amazed when I started looking into this at how many school workbooks, exercise jotters and composition books we have. It's not a huge number, but it's more than I thought we had, and it's enough to get an idea of children's education and schoolwork over the past decades and even the past centuries. We have a photocopy of an exercise book from 1819. We have Donald Dingwall's exercise book from Findon School in Colbokie. That dates from 1844, and it contains some really interesting examples of maths problems under the heading, beautifully written, the heading proportion. So for instance, and if you can all work these out, you can send the answer in a postcard. A granary contains 600 bowls of wheat. How many English quarters will fill it? Or how many shirts may be made out of 4 pieces of linen, each 25 yards, when 40 yards makes a dozen? How many yards of muslin at 2 6 may be given as barter for 20 spindles of 5 yarn at 3 3? So good luck to anybody who could work those things out. I mean, it doesn't help that we don't use some of the measures anymore. But these are all written in Donald Dingwall's beautiful handwriting, with all his workings out and calculations next to them. If we turn to the exercise books of Margaret and Rita Munro, we can learn what they were studying in science class in the 1930s. Their headings include how to burn iron in oxygen, how to find the solubility of potassium chlorate at the temperature of the room today, 13 degrees. And again, these are very beautifully written, very neat books, full of the girls' experiments with Bunsen burners, with how to calculate boiling points, how to calculate the volume of different materials. I really enjoyed looking at the geography exercise book of one of our regular viewers, which she deposited with us a few years ago. And it shows the geography class at Inverness High School being absolutely jammed full of information. These jotters are absolutely beautiful. Detailed information about individual countries, about the flora and fauna of each place, their crop output, their population density, and all sorts of different things. So there's a heading, the pastoral industries of New Zealand, another one, all the towns of Brazil organised. I particularly enjoyed in these geography jotters all the hand-drawn maps of Australia, multiple hand-drawn maps of Australia showing mineral deposits. The next one shows communication networks. The next one shows crop production. The next one shows cattle density. So many different things, and they're really lovely to look at. But those kind of records are very much rooted within the education system, so you can see the maths problems, the science experiments, and so on. We then hold a collection of slightly more personal school exercise books, things like composition books, where the pupils have been given a little bit more freedom to choose what to write about, as well as school magazines, which have pupils writing on myriad subjects. The composition book of Isabel Simpson dates from the 1910s, and it was found behind a wall in a house in Rosemarkie, and it holds a special place in my heart because when I started with the service 10 years ago, it was one of the first, maybe the first collection that I catalogued. And in this exercise book, Isabel writes various pieces on different subjects. I've previously shared her composition on the Great War, but I thought this week I would share something a little bit more uplifting, entitled Composition on Spring, 7th of May 1919. And she says, "Spring is my favourite season. It is the first season of the year, and most people like it best because it's in spring that the trees and flowers come out. It's nice to see everything coming to life again after the long winter. The primroses, violets, snowdrops, polyanthus, and many other flowers also come out at this time. It's in spring that the lambs come, and it's nice to see them playing about in the fields. The birds also begin to nest. They build their nests in all sorts of places. Some build in roofs, others in trees, bushes, sheds, on the ground, and many other places. In spring, the grass gets greener and the trees begin to bud. The farmer begins to get the ground ready for the sowing. He ploughs and harrows the land first, and then sows the oats and harrows it again. It's in late spring that the young grass is rolled to give the clover and grass a better grip of the ground. In spring, the birds come back from the warm countries where they went for the winter. It is now that the weather gets warm, and it's bright till very late at night. It's lovely to be out in the long, warm evenings. These are some of the reasons why I like spring best of all the seasons." Another great example of a composition book or an exercise book that's got a little bit more freedom in what you write is an example held at Nucleus in the Caithness Archives. And this is the school book from 1910 to 1912 of Sarah Reid, who was born in 1894 in Keith in Caithness. And my colleague Anne in Nucleus said, "I absolutely loved looking through this book." She said, "I was blown away by how very bright this young woman was when she was writing this book." Here's Sarah's piece entitled "What Scotland Will Be Like 100 Years Hence," which she wrote in about 1910, so you can judge how well it's compared. "Time takes turns," says Robert Burns. "When we think of what our ancestors told us 100 years ago, we can see how true this saying is. Scotland today is beyond comparison with what it was 100 years ago. Before the end of the 19th century, things were moving on by leaps and bounds. Reflecting on the past, we look forward to the future with great expectations. Things are being invented at the present day, but things that will be invented 100 years hence will be more to the tone of perfection. For instance, instead of ships and trains, goods will be carried by aeroplanes from one country to another. People will also travel by them. They will be seen flying above heads at a terrific rate. The mails will also be carried by them. Motor power will take the place of steam. All the big liners and steamers will be driven by motor power, and even the small boats will have motor power. Motor cars will take the place of stagecoaches in the poorer districts. Ordinary bicycles will be out of existence to a great extent. Motorcycles will take their place. In Parliament, there is drawn up the Smallholders Bill, which will no doubt be passed in the future. Thus, in 100 years, it will affect Scotland greatly, for there are long stretches of moors, which perhaps is Scotland's best soil, and will be cultivated. These moors are only the pleasure of such people who go out and hunt. Thus, when they will be cultivated, the poor and the rich will be on a more common level, and emigration will be less. Wireless telegraphy was invented not very long ago, but in the 21st century, it will be used for a far greater extent. Telegraphs will go all over the country, and in this way big steamers that are out on the Atlantic Ocean will receive news from the land. Also, wrecked vessels will have help in a very short time by sending a telegram to the land. Many new inventions will be made. Instead of the washerwomen washing the clothes with their hands, they will be washed by machinery. Perhaps everyone will not have a washing machine, but they will maybe be used to a greater extent. Few of the people who are living at present will be alive to see if the facts mentioned here will come true. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's really beautifully written. And I mean, it's astonishing how much of it has come true. Now, both of those composition books, Isabel Simpson's and Sarah Reed's, have the red pen marks of teachers throughout them, correcting punctuation and spelling and sometimes writing a comment. We also hold teachers' views of children. Now, I'm not going to go into that because those are adult voices, but the only one I did want to share is a school report which references how a child is doing through school. I'm not going to name the child because I know that she is very much still with us. But the teacher writes on the side of her report that the very kind of veiled comment that she is now slowly learning the pleasure of cooperating, which I think is the height of a passive-aggressive comment. Okay, so what about out of the school setting, but still in a place of visibility to adults? We hold some lovely examples of children writing to parents and grandparents. So, for instance, the letters of Thomas Frederick Fraser, written to his grandparents, Lord and Lady Lovett, in around 1812. I've shared some of these with you in the Fraser of Lovett episode, but here's a different one. And again, the extraordinary ability of this young person to write. Aberdeen, 29th of June, 1812. My dear Grandpapa, I thank you for your kind letter of the 18th of June, which gave me much happiness when I saw it. I cannot express my gratitude at you and my grandmamma inquiring so often after me when I was ill. Mrs. Bentley has just received a letter from my grandmamma in which she tells me to write to you before Mr. Bentley comes home, which I shall try to do as well as I can. I went to Arthur's Seat today with Mrs. Bentley to breakfast on Saturday, and went on in the forenoon, where Mr. Farquhar, who is married to a sister of Mrs. Bentley, stays, and we came home at night. Mrs. Bentley ordered a carriage because she thought that the walk would maybe be too much for me. Mr. Bentley was to sail from London on Thursday. He has bought me a bust of Sir Isaac Newton for my bookcase. We got out the play on Friday, and it continues till tomorrow for 3 weeks. I think I am quite well now, but not quite as strong as I was before. The doctor makes me take pills, which I found hard at first, but by custom I think them easier now to take. Mr. Bentley desires to be kindly remembered to you and my grandmamma, and says that he would have wrote to my grandmamma if I had not been writing to you. Please send my love to my grandmamma. I remain your dutiful and affectionate grandson. And then at the bottom, Mrs. Bentley has written, Frederick has written this letter without my assistance or any correction. So just lovely. And he clearly has a very great passion for learning and self-improvement. In another letter, he says to them, thank you so much to his grandparents for taking such an interest in my education and my universal accomplishments. He talks about attending dancing school as well as his studies of French language, reading, drawing, very interested in things like Homer and Plato and things that most teenagers now would not be immersed in the same way. But I want to finish, and I'm so glad I've still got 15 minutes because this is where I want to spend the bulk of the time, by looking at some diaries of children in our collections. So we're going to start with an old favourite. Jen and others I know will be pleased to hear. We're going to start with an extract from Malcolm Blaine's diaries. You may remember from the episode I did on Malcolm Blaine much earlier on in this series, we have about 7 of his diaries written when he was aged from about 9 to 12. This is an extract from a diary he wrote in 1902 at the age of 10. And it's full of postcards, so he's stuck postcards into the diary and he's written all round the outside of them. These are just a few postcards I had of Nairn. I often used to look at them while I was at school, while my people were at Nairn. And I used to think, at this very minute, they may be going shopping in that little street. They may be on the high street. And when I looked at that picture, it made me feel sad, because I thought of what I should be doing at home, enjoying myself so delightfully. Now, the other picture, picture 1, was given to me for a departing present on leaving Nairn to go to school by the Mackenzie's nurse, whose name was Luck. But the other 2 I bought for myself. Also, I like to remember that day when I left Nairn, waving to my sisters and people as the train went off. It was September the 20th, 1902, a day which I like to remember. It was a sad day, and yet it was a very exciting one, happy with excitement also. How well do I remember waving and saying goodbye, 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 see you again soon. Picture 3 is of the railway bridge over the River Nairn on the forest side, taken from the moor. Here ends my account of the postcards from M.G.S. Blaine. His way of writing is just so lovely. I also like this diary. This entry. This is from the same diary, and it is entitled Chapter 8. Yes, they were the record days of this term. Number 1. Saturday, 20th of November 1902, Stonehouse, Broadstairs. That day I expected Mother and Baba at 2:30 p.m. After lunch, I sat down in the big classroom and waited for a good half hour. That half hour seemed very long. My heart was beating heavily every second. And presently Mr. Churchill came in and said, "Blaine, you're wanted in the drawing room." I went with haste, knowing why. And when I entered it, I found Mother standing by the door and Baba sitting on a little chair, talking. She ran to me at once, giving me a kiss and saying, "Here, Mackie, here," and stretching her hands up. This is the baby. In her hands was a bookmark and a little flower book. Soon after, we went out to the fields and saw a part of the landscapes. He's writing in 10-year-old boy's handwriting, so you'll have to humour me when I can't quite read all of it. So he says they went out into the fields, and then when they returned to the road where they found Grace. We went down on the sand in the afternoon, and then after we came home, we had tea with Mr. Churchill. And after the tea, we, that is me and Mother, went to a concert while Baba went home to bed. And then we said goodnight until tomorrow. So that's one of the highlights of his term. Then, another one, Tried Sole. Had roast chicken with sausage and bacon, including chopped up fried potatoes and cauliflower, interesting spelling. Had bread and butter, pudding and cream. It was the best dinner I had had for 9 weeks. It was almost delicious. He goes on to say that they went out in the afternoon to go to the West Gate to see Nigel and Evan and Mrs. Fitzroy. However, we got into a tram and only got as far as Broadstairs Station, where we found that we had to change trams. Well, in waiting for the next tram, a train rushed into the station, so we rushed and got onto that, and found it only went to Margate Station as follows: 1. Broadstairs, 2. East Margate, 3. Margate West. And so at Margate we took a cab and drove to Westgate, and then we went to Turret Court where we found them, and we walked up to the Green until we got a cab, drove home to Margate where we took the tram to Broadstairs Station again. We went back to the Albion where we had tea, and this is what we had. 1. Shrimps and watercress and bread and butter and cake and tea. I forgot to say that I also had ginger beer for lunch. After tea, we drove back to Stonehouse, and soon after came goodbye until the holidays. And I must say, I felt very low for the next 2 hours, as I knew I should not see my people again until the holidays. I love that way of going. I felt very low for the next 2 hours. He's just got such a lovely turn of phrase. Now, regular viewers will remember that Malcolm Blane would go on to be killed in the First World War at the young age of just 22. Now, I also photographed and researched and wrote notes a lot from the diaries of Hester and Neil Fraser-Tytler, brothers and sisters. Hester's start at the age of 12 and Neil's at the age of 13. Neil's focus on shooting and hunting and being on the estate, and that's something that he would continue to be fascinated with throughout his life, touring South America and shooting birds and different things. But also that he would then, that interest in weaponry would actually go on to be very useful to him, and he wrote a book on field guns in the First World War. Hester's diaries detail her social life, things like, on the 3rd of March 1898, first dancing lesson, I like it awfully. And on the 4th of March, going to see the Queen at Windsor Castle, saw her twice in her bath chair. But I don't have much time, I've only got 9 minutes left, and I really, really wanted to share some extracts from the diaries of William James Sage Scott. So we'll put Hester and Neil aside for the moment and maybe come back to them another day. But I really wanted to share with you these extracts from William James Sage Scott's diaries. He is a descendant of the famous Sage family of ministers in the Highlands. Previous Lorna episode on that family, if you want to go and look at that. And that was from his mother's line. And I'm sure that those of you who love Malcolm will shortly also love William. William J.S. Scott was born in 1912, and his diaries date from 1927 to 1928, when he was about 15 years old, and he was at school in Edinburgh's Daniel Stewart's College, which is now part of Erskine Stewart's Melville College in Edinburgh. His diaries bring me so much joy. Sometimes if I'm having a bad day, I'll just run up and have a quick look at William's diaries. Like Malcolm's, there is so much personality in them. You might remember previously I shared a little extract from William's diary where he has a day off and he says that he spends his day determined to teach his goldfish to eat out of his hand. You'll actually see that interest in fish and reptiles and animal life and plants absolutely continued. So I'm really going to talk very little more. I'm just going to share some extracts from William's diaries for you. They give such a good flavour of public school life in the 1920s. I kind of feel like just William might have been modelled on him, but also they're very like something out of, I don't know, The Railway Children or Tom Brown's School Days. There's a real feeling of public school life. So this extract here, and remember he's about 14 or 15. Thursday, read The Bride of Lammermuir, and my bad opinion of Scott's writings was 3 times confirmed. Afterwards, went for a walk with Foggy to Castorphan Woods, from where we saw delightful views for painting, and I found 6pence embedded in the ice. Another entry says, in the morning, Foggy brought across Beattie's school magazine, a much better and less restrained mag than ours. I had been drawing pictures of fancy goldfish, and Foggy finished them with me. When Foggy came round for me after dinner, we went to Ronald's to return to him the book that I had copied the fish out of, and then we went home. Another one says, and I feel like Foggy is often, they're always up to mischief, I think, him and Foggy. Next one, Foggy and I learnt our parts in the morning. In the afternoon, we went round all the old second-hand shops in search of a tank. None of them seemed to know what a glass tank meant. I saw a jolly good tank sitting in the corner of a man's shop, and when I pointed it out to him, he said, "Oh, do you mean a thing what goldfish swim about in?" He offered it to me for 7 and 6, which was a reasonable price, provided it didn't leak, but I refused it on account of small funds. Another entry, continuing that interest in the fish and wildlife. I found out by means of Henderson Arch that the aquarium was open, whereupon I rejoiced excessively and ascertained the statement's truth by means of a Scotsman. He goes to the museum, the National Museum in Edinburgh, and there's a very long entry where he talks about the way the galleries are laid out, his passion for the taxidermy, the animal section where he can see all these different animals. And another entry, this one where he says, Saturday, in the afternoon, Mummy and I went to the museum. I saw many natural history items that interested me very much, and also a Planius corbeus var Alenius. I might have got that wrong. It gives one a new energy, a visit to a museum, a new interest in life. Just an old head on young shoulders. So he's obviously particularly interested in animals, in again in learning things, but not very academic, and we'll come back to that at the end. Now, obviously, attending church and Bible knowledge was a huge part of public school life in the 1920s, and mostly it gets a passing reference. So he'll say, attended church, or wasn't able to go to church because I had a headache, that kind of thing. But on one occasion, the diary is very vocal about his interaction with Bible knowledge. Thursday, abominable day, although it did not rain. A miserable, hypocritical minister came to inspect us upon Bible knowledge. He gave us a lecture on reverence, which was a sort of pointless, reasonless, senseless letting off of surplus meditation. Various changes were made to the timetable so that as many classes as possible could enjoy, his company, and we missed 15 minutes of rugby for it. Unimpressed. Now, like Malcolm, William often came to the Highlands for his holidays because, of course, that's where the family were from, and his diaries talk about his experiences in the Highlands, exploring around Loch Lochy. So when he's looking around the edge of Loch Lochy, he finds a little stream, and he writes in his diary, found 3 different types of water beetles, but the specimen I took home escaped. You can just imagine his parents just being like, please stop bringing things home. He talks about climbing Ben Nevis, and he says, the climb is serenely easy. But when he got to the top, he says, ate so largely and injudiciously that I had a bilious attack. He goes on to say that it was a very jolly business getting back down Ben Nevis, and he collected mosses and plants to press and label on his way down. And he uses a lot of those public school things. Things are a jolly good lark, and things are people as an awful old chap, and things like that. At one point, he goes cycling up Lochie side when he's back in the Highlands on holiday, and this is what he says about that. They are mending the road up there. So he's on his bike, and he says, they are mending the road up there, and where it is mended, it's a dream. A smooth, regular, wide, neat, well-made road, such as found in the Low Countries. But where it is unmended, let us not even say what it is like. We went up past Loch Oich, past the Well of the Seven Heads, for 7 miles to Fort Augustus, where we picnicked. Then, where the windows of heaven opened, and the tap turned full on, and it rained steadily until the next morning. But I want to finish with 2 extracts, which were the ones that made me laugh out loud. I already loved William, having learnt about him desperately trying to feed these goldfish to eat out of his hand, and they're names like Asperus and Hesperus or something, I can't remember, and he's trying to teach these fish to eat. So I already was very fond of William, and then I came across these 2 extracts talking about exams. So he says, at one point he says, I haven't filled in my diary for ages as I seem to be in a chronic condition of hurry. But this one, have not filled in diary for long, nearly a month. We have had exams. Had maths exam, in which I have done unspeakably badly. Started learning rugger with Foggy. He is an optimist, but even an optimist cannot dodge bare facts forever. Exams are imminent. And no, he's no better at gym. You might think, well, maybe he's not so good at maths, but at least he's good at sports. Well, 22nd of June, we had a gym exam, and I had the joyous total of 1 mark. Now, you'll remember, I hope that you've enjoyed William's diaries as much as I do, but you'll remember, as I said, that Malcolm was tragically killed in the First World War at the age of 22. Well, I'm genuinely sad to tell you that William had a very similar fate. He lost his life in the Second World War at the age of 32, having served in the Federated Malay States Volunteer Force, and had been a prisoner of war for a considerable period of time in the East. So it's a bit of a reminder, sorry to finish on that slightly low note, but a reminder that of these children, many of them went on to have long and fruitful lives, but some didn't have that luxury because of the situation that the world was in at the time. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing some of those voices. There are voices of children that can be pulled out of the collections if you know where to look for them. And also it's always worth taking the time just to calculate when you're reading a diary. Sometimes it's obvious that they're in children's handwriting, but other times you go, actually, I wonder how old you were when you wrote that, and you calculate it and you go, actually, you were only 16 or you were only 14, and it changes how you read the diaries, even if they're not labelled as a children's diary. So I hope you've enjoyed them. I'm sure we'll come back to more children's voices in the future because it was just really fun to put together. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you again for all the votes that enabled us to become Record Keeping Service of the Year. Truly appreciated. I hope you can join me next week where we'll be looking at stories from Invergordon. And a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland's charity, and there's no subscription required to take part in this series of events, and no payment either. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining me and for all your lovely comments. And yes, Dodie, I see your comment and I do remember them, and I'm delighted to see that you're watching today. Thank you.